Welcome to Duality Check, the podcast where two brothers embark on a thrilling journey through the realms of scientific inquiry, the enigmatic mysteries of the past, and the uncharted territories of spirituality. Join us as we explore the wonders of our world and beyond, all while embracing the roles of curious bystanders rather than experts. Together, we'll unravel the intricate tapestry of existence, blending the dichotomies of knowledge and wonder. Get ready to question, ponder, and delve into the dualities that shape our understanding of reality on Duality Check. I'm Drew.
And I'm Dean. And
welcome back for another week.
Yeah. We're back to another Secret History of the World episode.
That's right.
Dude. Did we talk about this on the show? I don't remember. But I read an article about how like AI detection works.
Yeah.
And apparently one of the words AI like excessively uses is the word delved.
No way.
And it's in our intro, and I'm like, shoot, should we edit that a bit? And I was like, nah, we proudly embrace our AI overlords over here.
Yeah. I mean, they've helped us a lot along our journey here.
Pretty funny.
That is funny. I've actually heard it, and when we were doing our AI episode, I heard that. I heard delve and a lot. I heard a lot. There's a few words that kind of synced up, and I couldn't tell if it was because it's kind of learned us from listening to us so much, and like, because we've had it listen to a couple episodes, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting that just like humans, AI seems to like gravitate towards the use of certain words, because I know humans are guilty of that.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure, yeah. You learn a new word, and you you know your friend learns a new word, and they're
like constantly like looking for a place to use it.
Almost like yeah, we're all guilty of that.
Everything is euphonious now.
So I've got a couple of articles that I read in that 1440 email blast.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah.
You signed up for it?
I did, yeah. So the first thing that I saw was the net neutrality is being reinstated. I don't know if we've talked about that much.
We have not.
But
yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
My understanding is that at net neutrality, so essentially the issue comes down to whether or not ISPs can set like priority rates for certain people to access the internet, right? And you would think, like, because if all you think of as consumers, you're like, well, I don't want my ISP charging me extra for faster speeds or anything like that, or for priority service. But really, what you need to do is take into account that it's not just individuals on the internet, it's companies too. And so when someone like Netflix wants their servers to have, copies in all of the different ISP data centers so that their server is as close as possible to your house to get you the best, fastest speeds. But that also means that ISP can't charge Netflix more for that priority service. So not having net neutrality, if you remember in the days like leading up to before it got repealed, the scare stories that we were sold on was that you would end up having to pay a lot more for internet service. But in reality, that didn't technically happen. You'd end up just getting
slower speeds, right?
Yeah. So a lot of the nightmare stories didn't really materialize, but it did allow ISPs to charge companies,
Yeah. So in this
proportionally. But what did they? How did they cover it?
So they basically were just talking about they were kind of neutral on like where they stand on it, but that there have since been allegations of broadband companies having throttled video sites.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the Santa Clara County Fire Department randomly.
Oh, interesting.
But Verizon, specifically for that one, I think they called it a customer service mistake. Like it was just an anomaly that it happened to be the fire department that was like there was probably some bot or some kind of program deciding
right
or flagging it or whatever it might be. But yeah, they really don't say much other than that it has been reinstated. Mm-hmm. But I just thought that was interesting. So like the fact that they have that ability means there's going to be more mistakes like that.
Yeah.
They have the ability to throttle, meaning based on how good your whatever the broadband company might be and how much people, how many of their people are properly trained or systems are properly trained to perfectly flag things or
because part of the nightmare scenarios are things like companies making sweetheart deals with ISPs in order to pay them to throttle their competition over themselves and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I feel like that would be the quickest way. And obviously, it's already been reinstated. So how many years was that? Like 2 years?
No, it's been a while.
Has it been? I feel like it's only been like 3 or 4 years, maybe max.
Yeah, I don't recall. Hey, let's ask ChatGPT.
Yeah. You standing by?
When was net neutrality repealed in the United States? This is the wrong chat I asked it in. Hopefully, it doesn't talk about milkshakes.
Net neutrality was repealed in the United States
on
December 14th, 2017, when the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, voted 3-2 in favor of reversing the Title II regulations. The actual repeal went into effect on June 11th, 2018, marking the end of the net neutrality rules that had been in place 36 source.
Yeah, almost 6 years then.
Yeah.
Time is going by way faster now. In the last three years, I felt like a year. It's going so fast.
Yeah. As you get older, the time flies faster. Ooh. It's crazy how it happens like that. All right, what else you got for us?
So I had one more. It was about the Chinese having fully mapped the moon.
Oh,
here it is. So they released the most detailed. China's moon atlas is the most detailed ever made. So they've got these really cool maps that I'll send. You can find it in the article too, but it's on nature.com. So it says the Chinese Academy of Sciences has released the highest resolution geological maps of the moon yet. The Geologic Atlas of the Lunar Globe, which took more than 100 researchers over a decade to compile, reveals a total of 12,341 craters, 81 basins, and 17 rock types, along with other basic geological formation about the lunar surface, or information, The maps were made at the unprecedented scale of 1 to 2.5 million.
Whoa, look at this thing.
Yeah. And further down they have, so that's the geological one. Then they have the lithologic map of the moon. Tectonics.
Huh.
I was looking at these a lot earlier when I saw this article.
Dude, these are cool.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have these in the show notes and everything for everybody.
We'll link to this.
It's in Nature, which is cool.
That's awesome. Did they talk about any like new things about the moon that they learned through this?
No, it mostly just says that now that this information is out, people can start to really do the research and look over them. And
every question in geology starts with looking at a geological map, says Ross Mitchell, a geophysicist at the CAS Institute of Geology and Geophysics in Beijing. The new lunar atlas is really a resource for the whole world, he says.
Yeah, so now that we have this going to the moon, we can have a little bit more detail of where we want to go, what we want to look at, stuff like that.
The new moon took 100 research over a decade to compile.
It's interesting. I'm curious what's making those formations on the map. I want to zoom in because it's got like a color code.
Yeah. I want to find the high res version of this. I'll try and link to it. That's awesome.
Yeah. And we got some correspondence too. We got we got a comment on our YouTube channel
on our last episode, I believe,
for the Flint Dibble Hancock debate.
Right.
It's from Lester Brunt. How did you not get Flint's point about the hunter-gatherers during the Ice Age? He is showing that we have found mountains of evidence for hunter-gatherers, but nothing for a lost civilization. How is that possible when advanced civilizations leave far more traces than hunter-gatherers? Sure, we haven't searched everywhere, but where we do look, we find all kinds of stuff, from hunter-gatherers all the way back to the dinos and pre-dino life. We find all that stuff wherever we look. And we look in many places, but somehow we keep missing the evidence of the lost civilization. The scope of research into those times makes it extremely unlikely that we wouldn't have found any evidence by now. If a biologist would say, look, here is a survey of a woodland area. Look how many dead animals have been found, even rare ones like mountain lions. Look, we have records dating back to the late 19th century. All they find is dead animals. We all know no Bigfoots. You wouldn't say, oh my God, nobody is denying that there are animals in the woods, so why bring up that you have found all these dead animals? The point is, we collect all of the evidence in that area, and none of it shows evidence of a lost civilization or Bigfoot, which would be extremely unlikely if there was evidence for it.
Right. Okay.
I mean, I don't know that I think what Graham was really trying to say when it came to like a lost civilization is he was trying to put the point across that what we would assume is evidence for a lost civilization, because we are a civilization that, like, they're thinking of like a lost advanced civilization. And he says advanced, but what he means is advanced in a different way.
Right.
Not a technological
star mapping
and probably cognition, and like they had a more advanced understanding of like human bodies or whatever. Like,
well, he's
mostly talking about
when you press Graham from a scientific standpoint, he will back up. He will essentially only claim that the level of technology he's claiming is that they essentially understood the precession, they understood the heavenly bodies, they understood, astronomy to a degree that we couldn't match until, say, the 18th, 19th century, right?
Right.
So that's what the 18th century, I think, is what he specifically claims.
So that's what he bases his civilization theory on, is that they had that knowledge at least.
Well, that's as much as he will try and make a hard scientific claim to scientists about. He does speculate more than that in his books. But what I would say in response to this comment is, first off, I did miss that point when we were talking about this. Yeah. Like, we covered Flint's point about that as if he was just trying to prove that hunter-gatherers exist. And you're right. The point was not that. The point was this point that you laid out in the email or in the comment, which is that we do find lots of stuff from this time, but what we find is evidence of hunter-gatherers. And so what I would say to that is, yes, but there are problems with that. So if you've been in the like alternate fields or read enough alternate stuff, there's a lot of interesting work that gives a lot of specific examples of how many times evidence that doesn't fit theories, evidence that sits outside of acceptable explanation, usually gets shelved on a museum shelf somewhere in a basement where it'll never be seen again.
Yeah.
And that tends to be the way that evidence that is outside of a theory gets handled. And I didn't come prepared with, like evidence to back that up, but
examples,
over the course of this show, if you keep listening, we'll keep covering topics that will continue to make it more clear that is the case. So there's a number of books about giants and archaeological evidence of giants. And they definitely spell out, stuff going missing. There's the long heads, which we do have in museums and you can see. And there's different types of the long heads that you see. Like there's the type where, because the way they typically explain long heads is this practice known as skull binding, which is done even, I believe, to this day in certain tribes. But there's a very different look to a skull that has had skull binding done to it versus these long head skulls. Some of these long head skulls that have been found that don't show the same sort of like scarring and damage.
So that assumes
a skull.
That makes it seem like the people who are doing the binding are trying to emulate something.
Right. Something that they've seen elsewhere.
And put a lot of value on.
The other thing I would point out is there's a really good book called The Book of the Damned. The Brothers of the Serpent have a great series on it, and I'll link to that.
They have a recent episode on giants.
Yeah.
Their newest one was on giants. They had Heather, the girl who does the... she's the... what's her? Heather...
Yeah, she was the one who does the like crystal healing. Like
she doesn't do the crystal healing, but she does the Rishi or whatever.
Yeah.
I can't remember all the details of the things she was saying. Reiki, that's it. Reiki. Yeah, not Rishi.
She was on the giant episode?
No, but that's her husband.
Oh, I see.
That was on the Giants episode. The guy that they referenced in that episode.
Sweet. Yeah. We'll check that out. I'll definitely check that out.
I haven't finished it either.
Yeah, I've been going back through their back catalog trying to like catch up on everything. So I'm back in like the 50s still.
Yeah, I'll do that when I have time.
Yeah.
I went through like all of the Y files in like there's like certain channels, like Brothers of the Serpents is gonna be another one, but they have a lot of freaking episodes. So I haven't started that yet. I've gotten to like probably the first 20 episodes.
Yeah.
But then I haven't.
Yeah, they've got almost 300 2-hour episodes. So it's a lot of content.
For sure. I used to drive a lot for work, so that would be easy to do. But now I'm so close to home, and as soon as I get home, I'm ready to being a dad and getting shit done.
I don't drive as much either, and that was always my favorite thing to do on drives is listening to audiobooks and podcasts. So I have to make time for it now too.
Yeah, now I just need to go drive. Just go drive somewhere.
But the reason I brought up the Book of the Damned is the entire book is written. So what the title the Book of the Damned is referring to is damned. What he's claiming is damned is scientific finds. So it's an entire book of this guy who went through and found all of these instances of weird scientific findings that don't fit our normal worldview. And he catalogs all this evidence and puts it into one big book full of all of this evidence that scientists have thrown away and shelved. And then they just move on doing further studies. And so part of the response is, how do scientists deal with anomalous data that they find? When they find anomalous data, there's obviously it's going to depend on the person, it's going to depend on the scientist, it's going to depend on the funding sources and what type of control they have and what type of oversight they have and all of this, right? But obviously, like independent archaeologist who doesn't have anyone controlling, his funding or anything, if they find something that's weird, they're going to be more likely to publish it. And I think in general,
follow through with it, follow up with it.
Right. Yeah. I agree with the take in general that there's not some big conspiracy amongst all archaeologists.
Yeah, like they have like a meeting every year or something about it. Yeah, no, I don't.
I think instead what happens is they go about their business of archaeology, and then when something weird that doesn't fit the mold pops up, sometimes that weird evidence can get shelved as an anomaly. And rather than adjusting the theory to fit that anomaly, you just kind of call it an anomaly and move on. And then no one ever even realizes that's a data point that should be integrated at some point.
Yeah. I mean, it does go to show that there is, at some level, a grooming of the newer generations never to even look at those things. And if they've already been discovered, in a sense, sure, they might find more and there might be new stuff coming out. But any of the stuff that's already been shelved, it's already there's also this like stigma on it. So if somebody was to go and look and do their own research on it, they just get shunned out of the community.
Yeah, well,
so it's not only like that they're shelving it and like, it's benign. It's that they're shelving it and assigning stigma to anybody who includes it in something that might mess up the story.
Right. Or maybe the peer review process wants you to remove this anomalous data that you can't prove anything about before they'll publish your article.
Right.
And the thing is like, it's not like new archaeologists through the process of becoming an archaeologist go back over like every single find every single archaeologist ever in history has ever found. It's not like they get toured through the museums of the world and get to go dig through their basements and pull an old box off a shelf that no one labeled properly and look into it and figure out what, like, this is not, there are ways to hide or shelf information in such a way that minimal
eyes are looking at it or have access
minimal eyes
know about it
had a chance to see it before it got shelved. And it's an inconvenient piece of evidence, so it's just easier to put it on a shelf somewhere and forget about it. And there's been tons and tons and tons of cases of people finding weird things, and then someone from the Smithsonian showing up and taking possession of it and then it never being seen again.
Yeah. And I mean, the idea that we have looked everywhere is a strong point when it comes to, like, there still being a possibility of a lost civilization, right? Like the submergence of the quote unquote Atlantis, right? Whether it's some mystifying place or just over time it became mystifying, like to the hunter-gatherer cultures that remember it or have been told about it. It could just be a landmass where it was a hub. It was like an ancient Egypt or an ancient Greece where there was just a hub of activity and there was a lot of trade, there was a lot of commerce, and people had the ability to travel the world on boats or whatever their mode of travel was. The hardest thing to overcome with that is that it's underwater, and it could be, sure, there are places that look good for that, but you would still see traces in other countries where the trade was happening.
Right.
But, so that's the hardest thing to reconcile is like there not being a large amount of evidence of it in these other pre-cultures. But what I've been, contemplating since we did that episode and stuff is we just need to know how long, right? We know humans have been, how long had it been since their demise, right? So we know about the Younger Dryas, but there was 2 spikes of it, right? And they were thousands of years apart.
Right. There was the dramatic onset of the Younger Dryas, and there was the dramatic end of the Younger Dryas.
And we know that humans, not that it matters specifically for this, what I'm talking about, but like we know humans are 400,000 plus probably years old as far as our ancestry goes. So like how long was there like a golden period before the Ice Age and then before the Younger Dryas? So, and how many times had that happened? How many cycles? Like, we still don't know everything that's happened in the history of the Earth. We're still finding out, and things are changing. The ball is, humans used to only think humans were 100,000, 200,000. Now we're up to 400,000 years old. So, and as far as the civilization goes, like, we know that over hundreds of thousands of years, or even 20, 30,000 years, it could destroy everything that a civilization could have, their evidence of them being around.
Right. Well,
I guess and then after their demise, like Graham Hancock talks about, them settling amongst the hunter-gatherers, how many generations of those hunter-gatherers had gone by after those people had come and settled and then died, and only their stories lived? How many generations from then would have gone by before agriculture finally took root and what they were talking about finally took root? Like, maybe they just left them a book that they couldn't decipher. There's only a hand, maybe they had different language, right? So it's all just, even Graham and Flint, it's all their perception of history. It's not fact. It's not exactly what happened.
Right.
It's just putting the evidence that we have found into a story and then trying to convince, like telling people that this is everything we know. It's just that the arrogance of the established, archaeologists and geologists and all these people, like, they have a narrative. It's the independent people like Graham and others that are free to speculate. And some people are more outlandish or outside the bounds than others. But like Graham at least hones in on the scientific stuff, even though that's probably the hardest battle to fight. Like the myth might be the easiest thing to fight because you can't be proved wrong.
Right.
But
that's easy, quote unquote, easy for archaeologists to deal with because they can just call
it off.
Legends, like they can just
no
say
proof.
It's not true. It's just religious stuff. Which, I find a little bit lazy, especially, now, that we know that so many of these world myths have so many things in common, like the flood myth, especially being so persistent all over the entire world.
Almost every culture.
Also, the idea that there are some sort of entities that interact with humanity that have
some stage of their
more power over the universe than us, whether you call them gods or angels or jinn or, whatever, the Anunnaki, whatever you call them, like everyone is pretty consistent on those points. It's really, I think there is evidence, but I think it's just not the type of evidence that an archaeologist is willing to, entertain.
Yeah. But would they be more willing to entertain that if they were allowed to freely, because a lot of their work is dependent on funding.
Right.
And that goes back to what we talked about in the very first episode, right?
Is the whole funding and publishing apparatus that science has to go through,
even
is a way to keep
geologists and archaeologists.
It's a way to keep renegades in check while everyone else, fights against a new idea until that idea finally wins out through a clawing battle. Right. And, like that's sold as like science working. And to a certain degree, I understand that. Like, not every single new crackpot theory that comes up should be fully. Yeah, it's not like someone comes up with some new crackpot theory and all of a sudden, like, a giant chunk of scientific funding goes to it. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But it also doesn't make any sense to not fund weird theories, because time and time again, over and over and over in history, it's always the weird renegade theories that end up overturning the old established ones. Yep. And you never know where that's going to come from, so you can't plan for it, but you need to not be shooting all of those in the foot by not funding stuff that is quote unquote unscientific or pseudoscientific.
Well, and not even just the funding, just look because at if we're like, it would be helpful if, like, what Graham has been enduring since his Netflix series, if that stuff would stop. Right. Like the name calling, the trying to cancel somebody, be like, at least let's be human to human here. Like, you're dealing with another human, you're trying to smear them. Yes, you're attacking their work, but instead of attacking their work, you're attacking the person, and you're trying to label them, and that's just unproductive for everybody. Yeah. Like we saw in the debate, it was unproductive. They kept going up at it, But
bringing it back to the commenter, like,
sure.
And building off what you were saying, the thing is like, if human civilization really does go back quite far, I mean, we don't know how many times it's been wiped out. For all we know, the Younger Dryas was the only major reset we've gone through, and humans have had 300,000 years before that of uninterrupted development. And so it's not so crazy to think maybe we did evolve. Maybe we did develop technology. Maybe we went through our pollution and global warming phase. And all of that information is so far back in the past where you wouldn't credibly look for it anyway. And if you did find that evidence, your brain is somewhere totally different. So you're barking up the tree of totally different theories as to what causes these anomalies.
Yeah.
And then later on, they keep developing, and they get to a point where they develop technology that is actually in tune with the earth, and maybe they're not polluting the earth, and maybe everything they build is really easy to be reclaimed by the earth, so that it all degrades, I mean, we're getting more and more that way as we start to realize the impact we're having on the earth. More and more of the stuff we make is designed to break down easily. Yep. And it will.
Yeah, and give us another 100, 200, even, I'd say give us like another 300 years. And this civilization, on our current trajectory, no calamities, and it might look like something like that where we're building fully sustainable housing and we're getting rid of all the old stuff and repurposing it into, energy, instead of it being used for structural or whatever it might be.
Right.
Like, and even over
you can
enough
see
time,
a hypothetical theory where or a hypothetical future where everything has gotten so in tune with the earth, so green, so like biodegradable, that eventually everything we build, it can be reclaimed by the earth, and then eventually, because we've moved on and so many 100 years have passed, there's a big project to go and take all the stuff from humans in the past and clean that as well.
Yep, repurpose that and basically like put it back into its original form.
Right.
If it's possible.
All I'm saying is with hundreds of thousands of years of humans evolving before we had our shots, it's just not inconceivable that you wouldn't find much. But what you would find would be the stone structures. What you would find would be the things that are built that will last for a long time. Like the things we've built that you'll be able to find is Mount Rushmore, Hoover Dam, stuff like that. And
unless it
I
was
think that's
torn down.
Those are essentially the equivalents of the things that we're finding and having questions about.
Right.
With
Göbekli
Egypt
Tepe
and Göbekli Tepe and
Yep.
all the crazy stuff in South America and
Yep.
the Bimini Road and
Yeah.
Yonaguni and all of these things. I mean, you give a couple 100,000 years and Mount Rushmore at some point will look like you would be able to tell it was a statue, but it won't be totally clear. It'll be
defaced enough, and you'll see some smooth edges, some lips maybe, or
Right.
like a part of a lip, or
at some point in
know?
the future, someone will have to write a thesis on whether or not
yeah,
what we now call Mount Rushmore was a man-made thing, you know?
right.
So
I think this has been, that comment in our commentary has been a perfect segue into the beginning of our next part of Secret History of the World. So let's take a break.
cool. And then
Come back and hop into it, bro.
hop on some secret history when we come back.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Be back in a bit.
Adios.
Oh, that was abrupt. We're back.
We are back.
Let's finish this out, though. All right. So I wanted to do a quick beer review.
Oh, yeah. What are you drinking?
This is a Fall River Brewing Company. I believe that's up north in like Humboldt area, Trinity area, something like that. It's Numb and Number, a double hazy IPA. It is somewhere on here, 8.2%.
Father approved.
That'll do, pig. He gets it. So yeah, we were trying to remember where not that I know which chapter we left off on, but what we were talking about in the last one is like the chapter 8 on the Sphinx and the time lock. It was like the Orpheus story of Orpheus.
Mm-hmm. And he credited Orpheus for like inventing science and music and numbers and math.
Yep. So this is chapter 9, the Neolithic Alexander the Great, Noah and the Myth of Atlantis, Tibet, Rama's Conquest of India, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And I'll just read the intro here. If you have just a passing acquaintance with the myth of Atlantis, you may been left with the impression that there is only one source of this legend, Plato. The Platonic account goes like this. Egyptian priests told Solon, a statesman and lawyer of the generation of Plato's great-grandfather, about a great island in the Atlantic that had been destroyed some 9,000 years earlier, so in about 9600 BC. That's 11,600 years ago, basically.
Mm-hmm.
The civilization on this island had been founded by the god Poseidon and peopled by the descendants of his coupling with a beautiful woman called Cleito. As we saw in chapter 5, this intervention by a fish god is a coded account of evolution.
Interesting.
So it's set up that they're going to go into a bit of the Atlantis stuff. It goes on. The island of Atlantis, the islands of Atlantis were ruled over by 10 kings, each with his own kingdom. The 9 others being subservient to the ruler of the largest island. The central temple dedicated to Poseidon had statues of gold, including one of the gods standing in a chariot pulled by 6 winged horses and flanked by hundreds of nereids riding dolphins. Live bulls roamed freely around the forest of the columns in the temple, and every 5 or 6 years the kings who ruled the islands were left alone in the temple to hunt these bulls without weapons. They would capture one, lead it to the great column of Orichalcum, inscribed with the laws of Atlantis, and there behead it. Life on the islands of Atlantis were generally idyllic. In fact, life was so good that eventually people could not bear it any longer and began to become restless, decadent, and corrupt, searching after novelty and power. So Zeus decided to punish them. The islands were flooded until only one small islet remained, like a skeleton sticking out of the sea. Then finally, a great earthquake engulfed all that was left in the course of one day and one night.
Great earthquake.
So we were talking about the, from that email we got, or from the comment we got about Atlantis or the possibility of a previous civilization. You could imagine a flood of an island, it being sunk down basically below the sea, and then an earthquake enveloping it, almost like tectonic activity, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could be completely just gone, like not even on the surface of, like, far enough, like have gone back and escaped back into the mantle almost, or into the I guess it's the mantle. Like, it could just have been liquefied.
It could be covered up by, like, the ocean sediment and stuff. Because especially
for miles.
Right. Could be the case, or it could be, I know you've seen the Bright Insight videos with the theory that Atlantis was in Mauritania, the Eye of the Sahara.
Right.
And that's a pretty interesting theory. If you guys haven't checked it out, I'll leave a picture of the Eye of Sahara here.
Yeah, we'll do a satellite image because you can see it from space.
Yeah.
Or near Earth orbit.
And it definitely looks like it was ocean covered in water because there's salt
flats. Yeah, it's like salt.
They mine salt and gold out there, and it was supposed to be wealthy in gold.
That's true.
And also, like, that sort of area of the Sahara, like, you can see what looked like the evidence of a flood having gone over it.
Or that it was completely submerged in part of the ocean at one point, right?
Right.
And that that place itself might have been part of an island chain.
Right.
Or at least on the edge of Africa, like more towards, like, the coast, or just off the coast, like a Catalina Island today.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, if Africa
and then there was
had
that
raised
mountain range.
up,
There's that
that
mountain
North
range
Africa
on the coast.
had raised up.
Yeah.
Except I think they know that sort of in that area in that time range is when Africa was like a jungle, like it was all forested. It wasn't
deserted. Was that all of North Africa though?
I don't think so, but
I think it was more of like the northeast part that they like the whole Nile and Egypt and stuff. I don't know. I'm so far away from the mic.
Yeah. We are doing a podcast here.
I'm like leaning back, getting comfy, just chatting. Mike is further and further away from me. Yeah, no, the Mauritania stuff is, but even Grant or even Randall doesn't think that is where it's at. He thinks it's more in the Atlantic too, right?
Yeah, so the official geologic explanation for the Mauritania Eye of the Sahara feature is that it was a collapsed volcanic dome, which is why it has like the concentric rings.
Right.
I don't know that explains like all the salt necessarily, but
yeah,
because it would still, I mean, I guess it could have been
like if it did get
a
flooded.
volcanic dome that then like
crumbled.
Ocean came over, like, because
if it crumbles it would leave like an impact crater, and you could imagine like the ocean flooding inland and flooding that area after.
Yeah,
you're gonna have to edit this out. I gotta adjust this. There we
go. Your OCD getting you?
It was getting me. Yeah. I couldn't. I fixed yours earlier.
I like the Mauritania theory. Randall favors the Azores theory, that the Azores is the likely place for Atlantis.
That's that ridge along like the northern Atlantic, right?
Yeah, so like if you go
it's like
west of Europe, like west of Britain,
England,
or like the Straits of Gibraltar.
Yeah.
Like you keep going west, like that's the
it's like the Greenland.
Azores. Yeah.
It's like Greenland, Iceland.
And you can see like even on like Google Maps, like the body underground there.
Right. Yeah. You can see it like it was but it had plateaus too. It was like a large ridge.
Yeah. But the whole thing's underwater now. And
is that on a tectonic fault line though?
So according to Randall, his theory about the Azores, because they know now that it was above water because they
found the evidence. They
found like plants and stuff
that
are down in that ground.
That only grew above ground at one point or whatever.
Right. Or the types of rock that formed are the types of rock that can only form in the air, not submerged.
Right.
I believe was the other thing they found down there. But Randall talks about isostatic depression.
That's right.
So it's like the idea of it's almost like a seesaw effect. Mm-hmm. So, or like your butt sitting in a chair is another way
chair.
he'll use it. Like if you sit down on a cushion chair.
Memory foam. Like if you think of memory foam.
Memory foam less so. Like something with air.
You're thinking of right.
The act of your butt sitting on it, it creates that butt print, but it like pushes that air away and out and up.
Creates a bubble
where your butt is not, right? Yep. And that is similar to the idea, if you look back in the Ice Age, just how much ice was sitting on the North Pole. Think of that as the butt in the chair. And all that ice on the North Pole is a butt in the chair at the top of the world, which is pushing out the cushion around it. And part of that would be the Azores. And so that the isostatic, like that the weight of the ice up there caused the crust to push up elsewhere. And that would bring something like the Azores above water. And then when all that ice goes away, that can cause isostatic depression.
He calls it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the idea, part of the issue with Atlantis for a long time was the idea of a sunken continent not being known how it could happen.
Yeah.
But
has there been much exploration other than like the radar and LiDAR and like the geologic mapping of it, or have they
the Azores?
Yeah. Have they gone diving?
I don't know the extent. I know the people
how
dive
deep
there.
Do you know how deep it is right now? It's like hundreds of feet.
I don't.
Ask ChatGPT. Let's see.
Okay.
Maybe they know.
We're talking about Atlantis and the idea that some people consider the Azores as a possible location for Atlantis. And we're talking about the geologic concept of isostatic depression being responsible for when all the ice went away after the Ice Age, causing the Azores to sink. And so we're wondering, what's the state of study on the Azores? What do we know about them? I've heard that it's got a type of rock that can only form outside of water, and that they found evidence of plants that grew there at one time. And then, do we know how deep the Azores are right now?
Should ask for bullet points.
It's all good.
The Azores, a group of volcanic islands in the Atlantic, are often connected to the myth of Atlantis, especially due to their geographic location and unique geological features. The islands lie west of the Strait of Gibraltar, directly facing the Atlantic Ocean, aligning with Plato's account of Atlantis being beyond the Pillars of Hercules' 15 source. Geologically, the Azores are characterized by their volcanic landscape, which includes peaks, craters, and underwater plateaus. This matches descriptions by Plato of a volcanic Atlantis with high mountains, 15 source. However, when the Portuguese first arrived in the 15th century, the islands were uninhabited, showing no signs of an advanced civilization like that described by Plato. Recent discoveries have pointed to earlier human activities, such as pyramid-like structures and possibly ancient Carthaginian artifacts, but these are not conclusive evidence of Atlantis' 16 French source. The underwater pyramid found near the Azores in 2013 has fueled further speculation. It's a large, symmetrically aligned structure between the islands of Terceira and São Miguel. However, the area has been underwater for about 20,000 years, predating known advanced human civilizations. It's thought that this might be a natural geological feature rather than a man-made structure 17 source. Overall, while there's a lot of intriguing connections and discoveries, the evidence is not definitive, and the scientific community remains skeptical about the Azores being the site of Atlantis. The debate continues, driven by both new findings and ongoing speculation about this legendary civilization.
So when he was saying 15 source, 16 source, 17 source,
yeah.
he's actually they're actually citing sources within their response, which is cool.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say,
didn't know about this underwater pyramid.
I was gonna say the underwater pyramid found near the Azores, and that answers the question that I didn't ask, but I wanted to, is about whether the islands were volcanic, and they are, and that makes sense for how they found certain type of rock, because once volcanic lava flows, it does one thing when it cools in air, and does another thing when it cools in water, probably.
Right.
So,
well, we don't have a picture of a pyramid or anything. 60 meters tall, according to this article. But do you see, even ChatGPT fell into this fallacy.
mm-hmm.
It's the circular reasoning.
Yeah.
Because the area has been underwater for 20,000 years, predating known advanced human civilization. Because of that reason, it is thought that it is naturally formed. Right? So you see how the theory is leading the science. It's the narrative leading the considering of options of what we're allowed to consider as a fact.
Well, you know what that tells me is that that's all that it's being taught, because ChatGPT is going off of what's modeled and what it's read. So if it's read all of these scientific articles and was able to pull this information from those, it's pulling the words from those articles and in the tone and the so that tells me that the majority of what's written is written like that.
Right. And so that's where that bias creeps in, right? And science is the best human effort so far at looking at the world objectively, but it's still humans doing science. It's still humans creating human organizations of humans to do the process of science with universities
like you said,
and
so far.
journals. And so regardless of the fact that we do science with the scientific theory, it's still subject to human bias. And this is that form of human bias. Like, just because we have a narrative, a theoretical framework for what we think was human history and how it played out, that theory is now informing whether or not we even believe something that we find is man-made or not. Right. So your theory shouldn't be answering your scientific questions.
And the thing that it said too was the fact that we have found evidence of humans having been there, but it was what'd they say?
He said the Carthaginians. Isn't that what he said? Yeah.
The possibly ancient Carthaginian artifacts.
But
Which
these
I
are
don't know
not
if that's a
conclusive
period.
evidence of Atlantis. I wonder,
Right, but we're talking about
info we have of
20,000
those artifacts.
Because like 20,000 years, right? Because like I was talking about earlier, like if there was a civilization that was around more than 20,000 years ago, which Graham does speculate being possible. That's not part of his argument when he debates people like Flint Dibble, but he speculates that probably more than that, probably 30,000 years ago, the civilization was started, and 20,000 years ago, there's 10,000 years there or so, or maybe more, or maybe less, I don't know, but they became advanced in a sense of having the ability to maybe even use abilities that aren't known to us that we have access to within our minds to like that's the technology, is being able to use our mind to and like a lot of these accounts, and we'll get back into secret history because a lot of this does talk about like the secret history as view on this, but I don't know, 20,000 years ago, and then
that puts it squarely in the Ice Age when Atlantis should have existed.
And in that area, sure, it was under ice, but the water, like there might be areas, and if it was an ancient civilization that was during the Ice Age in that area, I guess that's the Azores specifically, right? That was probably under ice, right? Because I know most of Europe was.
Most of Europe was.
It's just west of Europe.
Well, Northern Europe was. I don't know
curious
how far south that would go.
Yeah. Anyway.
I think the Mediterranean would have still been liquid, and the Azores is pretty close to.
Yeah, because that's coming out of the Mediterranean, right?
Yeah.
Let's look it up.
Maps. I can't spell.
So that's the Straits of Gibraltar. So yeah, it's that ridge right there. The Angro.
Or is it this up here near UK?
Well, that's what I was saying, but I think it's right
this.
there. Yeah, it's right there. So yeah, it's more like smack dab and like, so this would be ice free.
Yeah.
That's it. So this would all be ice free. But like you're saying, the isostatic depression, and it might be more severe along a fault line. Like anywhere where there's a fault line, that looks like a fault line to me.
That sure does. Anyway, the Azores. Azores, Mauritania.
Look how far that goes down south.
Yeah.
So imagine that if that whole ridge south of where the line of ice was above water, at least the peaks of it.
Yeah.
And like, that's obviously like more, that's less deep where it's all white there and like the main bulk of it. But imagine there being like a bunch of like dotted lines or islands.
Yeah.
And that if you drew a circle, you could consider them a concentric ring.
Because I think the glaciers came down definitely this far.
Like, but look, you got the whole western coast of the Americas, or the whole eastern coast of Americas, I should say, that are like right there. You got Africa, Europe, like all just off the coast of that, maybe a few thousand miles or 1,000 miles or so.
Man, it would be a perfect place for like
trade.
For trade, right?
And like communications between the different lands.
They're perfectly situated for communicating between the eastern and western continents.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, if they were like the main go-between between the Americas and Europe and Africa back then, that would have made them incredibly wealthy.
Yeah, and all these stories of Egyptian artifacts being found in the Americas, and like those stories of the Grand Canyon. What was that?
Oh, on Y-Files, like the idea of like the Egyptian stuff being found in the Grand Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have to do a podcast on that.
That was a good one. But then right there, just southeast of the islands, Mauritania,
mm-hmm.
the western coast of Africa, North
and
Africa.
Jimmy pointed out himself that like he's not even saying the Azores wasn't part of Atlantis. It's just that the Eye of the Sahara
looks more like the concentric rings that
looks
were talked
like
about.
the ringed city that was described.
It's more inland.
Yeah,
it's like right under the name Mauritania over there.
The Richat Structure. That's not it. Oh,
yeah,
it
you're
is.
Just super zoomed in.
Yeah, you sure can see that from space.
Yeah.
All right. What else do we got?
Let's continue on the. So this is continuing on the Atlantis stuff. It would make this account of the destruction of Atlantis unlikely to be true if Plato were the only classical writer on the subject. Aristotle said, Plato alone made Atlantis rise out of the sea, and then he submerged it again, which has been taken to mean that Plato simply made the whole thing up. However, a little research shows that classical literature is packed with references to Atlantis. For example, in the works of Proclus, sure I'm saying that wrong, Diodorus, Pliny and Strabo, Plutarch and Posidonius, they include many elements that are not in Plato and seem to come from earlier sources, assuming that is that they haven't been made up too. Proclus says that 300 years after Solon, Crantor was shown by the priests of Sais columns covered in the history of Atlantis in hieroglyphic character. A near contemporary of Plato's, known as Pseudo-Aristotle, wrote about a similar island paradise in the book of Marvelous Things Heard. The great historian Marcellus, also a near contemporary of Plato's, is clearly relying on ancient sources when he writes that in the outer ocean, the Atlantic, there are several small islands and 3 larger ones, one of which was dedicated to Poseidon. This ties in with Plato's account in terms of the number of kingdoms. A Greek historian of the 4th century BC, Theopompus of Chios, retells a story told 200 years before Plato by Midas of Phrygia, that besides a well-known portions of the world, Europe, Asia, Libya, or Africa, there in another, which is unknown, of incredible immensity, where vast blooming meadows and pastures feed herds of various huge and mighty beasts, and where the men are twice the height and live to twice the age of men. We have already mentioned the quotation, Enoch and the myths of the legend of many cultures around the world recorded the prevalence of giants before the Great Flood.
Yeah. Well, if they're talking about the land of meadows and giants, I mean, there's also the theory that America was Atlantis.
Right.
And I think that's a pretty likely one as well, because a lot of the giant stuff, there's a lot of giant stuff that's been found in America based on the different giant books and stuff.
Right. Are they big books, or are they just about giants?
There's books, yeah, just about the giants.
Right. But are they giant books, or are they...
That one took me a while.
Like how big, like how much room do I need in my room for this?
It's a 2-person job to turn a page.
No, that's true though. I think there are some people who connect that to northern, I guess U.S. or just Americas, right? It could be South America.
Yeah. That's funny.
But as a kind of like for the archaeological discoveries, like a key point was like the underwater findings and artifacts like those off the coast of Mahabalipuram support the hypothesis that flood myths such as those involving Atlantis might be rooted in real events at the end of the Ice Age. So Mahabalipuram, I think that's one that Graham covers too.
Let's pull some stuff up on that.
Yeah,
we'll be right back.
Pictures.
And we're back.
I love that messy just da, 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 da. All right, we're back.
I wrote that one after a breakup.
Oh, did you?
Produced it. I don't know if writing is the right term because it's from a sample. But yeah, the jazz song that it sampled, like I kept taking like the really aggressive and then the really calm pianos back and forth. And that was like therapy out of the relationship for the ups and downs.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's good that you poured that into that.
That was a fun night. I stayed up super late at the studio all alone. It was a sad little Dean just making music all angry.
Look what it produced, though. Da, 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 da. I like that. Not you being sad, but...
Oh, that's all good.
So, yeah, let's get back into this a bit. And we had kind of left off with that little bit, that key point that I had pointed out. So it kind of continues, and hold on real quick because I need to turn on this light that I turned off for no reason.
Gotta be able to read.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, this light should be off. And then I come sit down, I can't see shit. So as I was talking about before, the underwater archaeologists are today discovering in many parts of the world remains of the civilization, which were covered by floods caused by the melting of the ice at the end of the Ice Age. In April 2002, diverse stories told by local fishermen were used to help locate the lost city of the 7 pagodas off the coast of Mahabalipuram in India. The temple-like structures that have been found are much grander and more complex than we would expect for the end of the Ice Age, the Neolithic, or New Stone Age. Author and investigator Graham Hancock, who has done so much to question academic assumptions about ancient history, was quoted at the time as saying, "I have argued for many years that the world's flood myths deserve to be taken seriously, a view that most Western academics reject. But here in Mahabalipuram, we have proved that myths right and the academics wrong, have proved them wrong." So,
yeah. I mean, I don't know about the claim that it's proof yet, but
sure.
Because I'm sure if we dig into it, archaeologists will have their story about it.
It doesn't seem like there's going to be a foolproof either way. Yes, evidence is evidence, but how can you prove your story based on?
Yeah, and I do remember Graham talking about
evidence.
this site in Underworld, his book about all the underwater archaeology, or like diving him and his wife did on all these sites. But I was always listening to that book to go to sleep to, because for some reason that particular book out of Graham Hancock's work, he everything's really drawn out and slow, and it just puts me right to sleep.
You're just waiting for that next point that doesn't come for another few paragraphs.
Yeah, and it's such a long book. So he really it's part of it is like a journal. It's in the middle, but it's kind of a journal of him and all of his diving adventures, right? And so he really spends time building up his whole experience to his finds.
I see.
And so it's not all just the meaty finds and theory.
Yeah, you want to hear the shit, the cool shit.
Yeah. So you'll pass out hearing him talk about building relationships with archaeologists in the area and planning his dives and picking the weather and you know.
Oh, because he goes into real that much detail, huh?
Yeah, it's like as I'm saying, it's kind of almost a journal of all of his dive times rather than a succinct, edited down book of just the best bullet points of the underwater work. But anyway. It is a good book. It's just also really good to fall asleep to.
So then within that book, what is do you remember what he was saying about Mahabalipuram at all? Or
no,
just that he referenced
honestly,
it?
it's just the impressions and the name pops in my head. I was like, I've heard this falling asleep a number of times. But
so we pulled
anyway,
up a
I
few
do know
images,
there's info about this in that book. So I want to comb that.
Go to your tab up there. I think we had the Mahabalipuram one.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is back out. I want to see where it's at in India.
This,
it's on the east coast,
the east
of
side
India.
of the peninsula.
Yeah.
I don't know if is that considered a peninsula? That's got to be, right? It's huge though.
Yeah, it's got to be. I don't know. Now check how many miles it is from east to west. No.
It's
so
huge.
Okay. It's in the what sea is that? Back out a bit again.
Looks like, is this the province name? Is it Tamil Nadu?
I was gonna say because it's off the coast, the temples.
Yeah.
It's in the Bay of Bengal.
Bay of Bengal. Yeah. Anyway,
look right there. You see that ridge right there on the coast.
Right.
That whole ridge right there.
I have it on satellite view on Google Maps, so you guys I'll leave an image of this area. But yeah, these continental shelves, it's a pretty...
Yeah, that's what that is.
During the Ice Age, I think a lot of these continental shelves would have just been above water.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them, but
Large. Yeah, because the water rise isn't uniform.
right. Well,
Like that whole idea of the
and with
isostatic depression and
exactly,
everything.
the
And like,
isostatic depression means
some areas
that,
are going to be more vulnerable to that kind of action. So some areas will subside more, some will be less. But
right. There will be rises and
it'll be like a
subsiding,
moving, like the Earth will move. It's not like a fluid or like a rigid, like this happened, now this immediately.
Right.
It's like perfect.
Or you ever played with one of those like
Yep.
plastic balls that's like full of water, the squeezy balls?
Yeah, the stress balls.
Yeah, the stress ones. And you can like squeeze them and it'll pop out between your fingers.
Yeah,
like, it's that.
That's perfect
you know?
isostatic depression.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's
An extreme example, but yeah.
similar. Yeah.
Same idea.
If you do it less, right? Don't pop it out through your fingers. Just do it a little bit less, and you'll see the idea of like, you know, you're pushing this, and yeah. Anyway.
Right. All right. Mahabalipuram.
So, none of the scholars dispute that some of these accounts from older cultures provided source material for the biblical story. Elements familiar to us from the biblical account, such as the ark, the doves, and the olive branch, appeared in the earlier Sumerian account, where Noah is called Ziusudra. He appears too in the Mesopotamian account, where he is called Astrahasis, and in the Babylonian account, which names him Upnapishtim. Weaving these different versions together creates an amplified version of the biblical story. One day, Noah was standing in a reed hut when he heard a voice coming through the wall, and he was warned of a rainstorm that would wipe out mankind. Tear down your reed hut and build a boat, he was told. Noah and his family set about building a great vessel made out of reeds, finally dabbing it with bitumen in order to make it watertight. So, you know, we all know the story. And then Noah opened a window and light fell on his face. The world was silent because all of humanity had been returned to clay. You know, all of the people who weren't on the vessel.
Right. I love the reapproaching the story of Noah's Ark with this new like lens to look through. And I wonder if the right approach is to consider all of the different Noah's Ark variations as separate details that branched off from the same story, or if some of them are talking about different, like, were there multiple arcs is essentially what I'm getting at.
Right.
And do these different cultures, are they recalling the survivors of their Noah's Ark tale?
Right.
For their part of the world?
I would assume yes. Like, that makes more sense. So, like, again, going back to this ancient civilization that had knowledge of the astronomy and us on the universe, you see that it's possible that if that's true and they had this knowledge, they may have even been able to track comets and
so they may have known that this was coming and prepared for it.
And maybe even though they were around, maybe their civilization they came from is no longer. And whatever, like, we're talking, you know, within this account, right? Within the secret history, like, this idea is like these people were quote unquote gods, and that the people who are retelling and brought down these stories, you know, they were primitive and they were still about to go through the transformation that we are now the recipients of, right? If they were a different iteration of humans, you know, that had been wiped out from a previous calamity, but somehow survived, maybe they have the ability of, you know, elongated life, like as talked about in here, right?
Yeah.
So maybe they're able to live 1,000 years, and maybe they, you know, had some sort of way of living amongst the earth to hibernate in a sense, or reincarnation, right? Which
they're the giants, or they're the long heads.
Yeah.
Like they
throughout history and throughout,
they may have been a different variety, not just human. Like they may have been the gods.
Right. And the idea of the gods was, and a lot of the accounts, a lot of the people that they're interacting with are really the demigods in the most recent accounts, because before the demigods was the gods.
Mm-hmm.
The demigods ruled after the gods had moved on and been pushed past the moon, right? In this account and in this idea. So the gods are gone from the earth, and now you have demigods who are the spawn, who are hidden by these mothers around the cultures, these mother goddesses basically, that hid their youngling because the jealous uncle wanted their, offspring to rule or some shit, It's kind of an interesting, archetype that is around the world at the same time, with different tellings and different stories of it.
The other interesting thing is, some of the flood stories don't use the device of an ark. Some of them go underground, the Zoroastrian tradition and the Turkish tradition.
We skipped over that a bit, but
right,
that's part of this.
Where they have the shelters underground, the big complexes that we're finding under Turkey.
Yep.
What are those called? I forget. But
I can't remember either.
Those things are awesome. There's whole cities that could house hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah, and they had different
there's
rooms.
Multiple of them in different cities, and then they found big giant tunnels that connect the different cities to each other.
Yep. What if those are the rings? What if those, that's Atlantis? What if Atlantis was within the earth at one point? What if that was?
Ooh, I was just thinking of that as an alternate strategy to the Ark.
True. And then there's also the I don't know if there's any, historical evidence of this, but the idea that maybe there was, we had advanced to the point where we could leave the earth.
Right.
And survive a calamity.
What if it was a multi-tiered approach, right? Because if you think of something like this happening today, let's say we had a century's notice that the earth was going to come to some sort of calamity, right? Within a century, we could send a good number of people off-world.
And
if we really dedicated our human resources to it, knowing that we're going to die.
Yeah,
humanity we could get a number of people off this earth, but we couldn't get all of us off.
Sure.
But then for the ones who are stuck here, you can imagine employing different strategies for survival on Earth. So you could see some people going with a giant boat approach,
right.
And you could see others going with a giant underground city approach.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. You could see some people just trying to move to certain areas that are naturally shielded by mountain ranges.
Because if we know this is coming, right? So if we're thinking of today, if something was coming to hit the earth that would wipe out everybody, had we done nothing to prepare, would wipe out. Maybe there'd be a small group that was able to, or already had shelter and just hunkered down or whatever. Anyway,
right.
We wouldn't be totally extinct, but they would be wiped out, all civilization. If we had foreknowledge of that, a century, you had laid out, you would see obviously the people who had the technology or the money to just leave Earth immediately and create their own thing and just survive it out there. And the people, based on where the asteroid or comet would hit, it might, you evacuate that area as best you can, get everybody out of the blast zone, the initial impact area. And based on where people are centered, More people, there's high mountains. You can dig tunnels. You can build stuff that's going to survive in the ground, because all you're worried about is like a blast or the fallout of the atmosphere being clouded and there being no sun or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the people on the boat would survive because they're just worried about the water. So that makes sense.
Yeah. And you could see how multiple different branches of civilization would restart out of the aftermath of that. Mm-hmm. And then how there would be a lot of commonalities that if you were clever enough, you might be able to trace back to the fact that we have a bunch of new civilizations all over the world that, you know, started advancing again. And eventually when science and everything became advanced again, you try and piece it back together, clues would be there that there was an advanced source civilization. And one of those clues would be measurement systems. Everything in the world today is almost either metric or imperial. Almost everything's metric except for us in America. So if something came, wiped us out, and then the new survivors evolved, likely they would evolve all based off of metric system. And they may take on different numbers and units over time, but you would be able to find the root of their common source of measurement system, of their common source of language. You would be able to tell that like most of the vocabulary of the world comes back to certain areas and certain times and a certain source language. You know, you see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
a lot of this is the type of evidence that we're finding now. It's all like so circumstantial and indirect, but it's really like you have to put it all together in a whole. And maybe that's the conspiracy mindedness of it all, but to like the Flint Dibbles, it's hard to like answer with any like smoking gun. It's all about like everything in totality, right, as little bits of evidence that work together.
Yeah, and just saying that we keep finding hunter-gatherers is not going to do anybody anything. Like, there are people who have probably found things that go against the paradigm and have shelved it, and there's probably going to be people who try to do that in the future. And, you know, to people like Flint Dibble, the newer people in archaeology and stuff, just be open-minded. And hopefully you get enough people who are open-minded and you just stop doing what they ask you to do. Like, what are they going to do? Either that or they have no archaeology done. Right. Maybe that's their ultimate goal, is to not have any done, and they can just paint the narrative on their own. But
nah, they like digging. All right, sorry for
no.
Everything keeps coming back to Flint Dibble right now.
I mean, yeah, because and honestly, that whole debate and
it's
then the follow up, it's all kind of relevant to this first chapter. Yeah, and I think we might only get maybe partly done with the next chapter. We'll see. But there's this part where they talk about right here. I'm going to read a bit and then can talk a bit more. Maybe go to a break right after. I don't know. We can also see in it a paradox that lies at the heart of the human condition. All love, if it is true love, involves a letting go. With his prowess with a bow and his handsome face, the blue-eyed... Oh, wait, I skipped a bit. Sorry. Maybe I'll just go here. Rama is in many ways like the heroes of Greek myths, such as Hercules, but in the story of Rama, there is, as I say, something new. Hercules was required to choose between virtue and happiness, and unsurprisingly, chose the former. Rama's story, on the other hand, contains an element of the moral surprise. The readers of the story will probably agree with Sita, as she argues with Rama that it is only right and fitting that he now accept the crown he has been cheated of since birth. But then Rama surprising choices, deciding not to take the ground that is rightfully his, not to marry the woman he loves. These dilate the moral imagination and quicken the moral intelligence. The story of Rama encourages us to see beyond the conventional, to imagine ourselves into the mind of others, and also, ultimately, to think for ourselves. Esoteric thinking has always sought to undermine and subvert conventional, habitual, mechanical modes of thought. Later, we will see how storytellers, dramatists, and novelists steeped in esoteric thought, from Shakespeare and Cervantes to George Eliot and Tolstoy, would quicken the moral imagination. One of the distinguishing characteristics of the very greatest literature, if great art and literature give a sense of patterns of laws operating beyond conventional thought, great esoteric art brings these laws near to the surface of consciousness. So, the story of Rama also brings us back to the notion that, according to the secret history of the cosmos, has been formed in order to create the condition to which people could experience free thought and free will. Rama could have enforced what is good and right on his people by ruling them with a rod of iron, but he let them decide for themselves. Rama is thus the archetype of the exiled or secret king, or secret philosopher, who influences the course of history not from the throne, but by mingling incognito among the people. Rama tried to help humans to evolve freely. And I skipped over like the whole kind of Rama story, but it's in the book, and I just wanted to go to that quote because, and I'll switch it over to a different type of archetype that some people might appreciate and some people might be annoyed. I don't know. But that it kind of reminds me of Aragorn from the Lord of the Rings series.
Yeah.
And if you know the story of Rama,
that's that same archetype.
It's the same archetype.
Mentioned. Yeah.
And it's the same type of people that are steeped in esoteric. Like we've been referencing Lord of the Rings in this book multiple times, and how they talk about, or how they are kind of steeped in the idea that human history
Tolkien is one of those.
Yeah,
one of those writers.
But the archetype of like Aragorn and like the similarities of him and Rama is like, he is the human that that is meant to be the king, but is deciding to live in the shadows and influence humans based on love, and he falls in love with an elf, and that's kind of like similar to Rama being offered happiness, but that the love of his life would die immediately because he touched her, or once he embraces her with love, she will die instantly, but he will be happy forever or whatever, but instead chooses to allow her to live happily, and he lives alone and in an anguish, but they both live.
Right.
And that's kind of how Aragorn was characterized in the books and in the movies. In the movies, not so much, because they cut out a lot of his backstory and a lot of the stuff he does, which I wanted to bring up to you because you're a Lord of the Rings fan, right? I mean, you're not you like it though?
Yeah.
Do you watch the movies too, or
I've only seen the movies? Okay. Yeah.
They're doing they're re-releasing them in theaters, but with the extended version, so they're like 4.5 hours.
Oh dang!
In June, it's like the 8th, 9th, and 10th. They're putting them in theaters again, and they're doing like days, so like Friday, or Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. They're playing each of the trilogy
right movies. So they're playing the first one all day Friday, the second one all day Saturday, and the other one all day Sunday.
Yep. Or I think it's Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, but yeah.
Gotcha. That would be fun.
My buddy told me about that. I think that would be fun. I have a wedding to go to on the first day, so I'd miss if I did do it. I could probably do it Saturday.
I believe those extended versions are already...
They're available.
They're available, so you could just watch that one ahead of time. Get yourself back on it.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, but I want to do the theater experience because I don't even know if I saw those in theaters ever.
Yeah, I remember seeing them in theaters. They were good.
I don't know if I did, though.
Yeah.
When did they come out? When was those first three come out?
It was early 2000s, I think.
Yeah, I think I saw like Two Towers and like Return of the King, maybe.
Yeah, one of them might have been as early as like 98 or something. I seem to remember them coming out while I was in high school. I'm old.
So, 2002.
Yeah.
So, yeah. 2001, 2002, and 2003.
Boom.
Wow. How old was that?
You were just a wee lad. You were just a wee lad. You would have been in elementary
I was like
school.
Emery's age.
Yeah. Yeah, like 10, 12.
Yeah. I think middle school.
Yeah.
I think I did see like the second. I think I did see Two Towers and Return of the King in theaters, but I think I didn't see the first one until it came out on. I think I saw it on VHS back then. I don't know. Maybe it was disc. Probably was disc, but
yeah, this archetype of the the secret king.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Secret philosopher, the secret king.
Secret philosopher. Trying to think of what other like cultural. It strikes a chord with me, like the describing of it, and I know of other examples, but I can't pull one off the top of my head. Maybe we can come up with some while we take a break.
All right, let's do that.
All right, cool. We will be back.
BRB. One, two, three.
No, it's a little longer than that.
Damn it.
Here it comes. Welcome back.
All right. We were trying to come up with more, and I think we came up with a couple.
Yeah. I could only think of Avatar: The Last Airbender with
Lyro.
Iroh. Zuko could be seen as the secret king.
I think Zuko might have a little bit stronger of a case.
Yeah.
But Iroh being the mentor.
Yeah.
could also be seen as the Secret King.
Then we thought of the Lion King. Well, you thought of it.
I said Rafiki, kind of like an Iroh figure, but then you said it would actually be Simba. So yeah,
right.
It's more of like there's always a mentor involved.
Mm-hmm.
Like even with Rama, I believe there was. I don't know. I have to reference back to that. But let's continue.
Yeah,
I have another little snip. And I didn't. Oh, and me, I did. So there is a simple Kabbalistic saying: everything you have seen, every flower, every bird, every rock will pass away and turn into dust. But that you have seen them will not pass away. This is a saying that would have seemed sympathetic to the rishis, seated with the legs folded so that the soles of their feet turned upwards. They had no desire, no gravity, the downward reductive pull of the material world. They headed instead for the spirit worlds. So like that initial quote, like the idea that everything will pass away, but that you have seen them will not.
Yeah.
This was a cool quote. And
that is a really cool quote. And that's kind of the nature of the universe.
Well, and that going back to what we've been talking about mostly on what we've been talking about recently about the Atlantis stuff and whatnot. That's giving you it's a good way to think about it. Like everything there may have been crushed, but that they have seen them. So the stories, like there's no, like, yes, there are dates, but we're talking about people older than Plato that are telling these stories that are passed down hundreds of years and then get to the ears of Plato.
Mm-hmm.
Like it could have been much longer ago that these things happened and that they have seen them, like in the quote, did not die and they continued to pass on. And, it continued to be changed through the cultural eyes of the people that it was bestowed upon. But inherently it had like a codex of information passed down. And there's like the idea of agriculture, the idea of all these different structures that are said to have been passed on, but based on the culture who's receiving it, it gets changed. Just like we know, translations are changed modern day, like even just translating between two languages, you lose an effect of what's being said. And like even what Flint Dibble was arguing in the videos he showed and about like the Mayan people and the Olmecs, and like the researchers in those areas are saying like certain words were abbreviated, and then because they were abbreviated, the people who came in who spoke a different language interpreted them differently, and it changes the entire idea of the culture. Like the day of bread turns into the day of the day of the raising of the flags turns into the day of bread, or the festival of bread. And then based on the culture, they assign a certain value to that, and it takes on a whole different story than the day of the raising of the flags. Like, what does that mean in contrast to the day of, or the festival of bread, right?
Right.
Like, that's a totally different.
That's the whole like
translation.
Yeah. Where did
changes your whole adaptation of the thing.
Yeah. Who talked about that? Was that one of
Flint's points? It was on
points?
Flint's points. Yeah, it was one of his points. He had the two different people who talked about the idea that things change based on who's conquering you and the stories that you pass on to them. And it continues to be passed on because they see it as a cultural point that they continue. Like, sure, they conquered them, but they have this fascinating story that they tell, but we're going to color it in our lens so that it sounds somewhat better for us.
Right.
So if we're white people conquering somebody else, like, they're going to color it to be like, oh, they saw, their ancestors as or their conquerors or leaders as being like us,
Right. So I wanted to respond to the actual quote we were talking about.
Yes.
Which is everything will pass away, but that you had seen it won't. Like that can be applied in other ways too. Like the entirety of human culture, like, is essentially a version of that. Right? Like no individual human will stick around. We're all gone. We're all ephemeral. We all have a certain clock that we expire by. But that we existed stays on in the memories, in your genetic sequence you pass down, in whatever developments culturally you've provided back into the culture.
Yeah.
Whether that's scientific or artistic.
Right.
And so, like, as humanity, that we have existed for a certain amount of time, like, all of these cultures get wiped out, but there are stories that pass down, and the Noah's Ark is kind of one of them. Like, it's almost like some flood came and wiped everything out, but that they had seen it couldn't get wiped out because, you know, it survived in all of these stories.
Yep.
But in general, like, it's that knowledge, it's that experience, that's that thing that's permanent. It's that pattern of information. That's the thing that it's unique to you and your experience, that you are having that can never be taken from you. But all of it that you see around you is temporary.
Absolutely. If you want, I can continue here.
Yeah.
So it seeded with the lakes folded. I finished with that. The reductive pole of the material world. They headed instead for the spirit worlds. They were able to see spiritual beings at work on the earth. How they help seeds to germinate in spring, flowers to blossom in summer, trees to bear the fruit in the autumn. And how seeds are preserved through winter by the same spiritual beings. The rishis experienced the ebb and flow of spiritual influence like a giant breath. Ancient Indian civilizations was like the lowest realm of heaven. Earlier, we talked about the way materialists misappropriate words and phrases such as the meaning of life, using them in a secondary and slightly dishonest sense. The same is true of the spiritual, often used by people to puff themselves as good-hearted, moral, and warm and fuzzy, pseudo-mystical way. But what this really means is the ability to see, hear, and communicate with the spirits, like the Indian adepts. So they immerse themselves in the vegetable consciousness, in the physical process, waking, sleeping, breathing, digesting, which we have seen are the gifts of the vegetable kingdom to the human body. By learning to control the ens vegetalis, or esoteric body, they could control too breathing, the rate of digestion, even the heart rate, and the flow of blood, leading to amazing feats for which the Indian adepts are famous. The ability to stop the heart altogether just by thinking about it, for example.
Yeah. I know we have scientific documented evidence of many of the monks being able to do incredible feats. I don't know. I wonder what, like, the latest is in that field, like how much has actually been documented. But I know,
there's plenty of stories.
Medicine and science and spirituality are rife with stories of, like, half of medicine is the fact that, like, your body, your stress, your mental state affects your health. The placebo effect has to be tested around with every drug because it is so strong and powerful. So we know that, like, your mind can create your health. I wonder, when you, like, talk about in a super disciplined way, if you meditate and learn to have access to control over your rate of breath and your pulse and all of these things.
Yeah.
I wonder what implications all that has for like anti-aging science and whatnot. Like maybe it's not quite so far-fetched that you could achieve some of these like mystical ages that people used to be able to live.
150, 200 years.
Yeah, like the Egyptians talk about in their king list how some of their kings were hundreds of years old. The Bible has accounts of people who early in the Bible lived hundreds of years.
Yeah.
That like there's stories all over the world of people living
and
to crazy ages.
Yeah, I mean, and these are pretty well known and historically documented. Sure, they're all stories, but
yeah,
like, and the fact that they're so widespread amongst the entire population and different cultures all over the world, like, and this is what it was talking about earlier about, or that was assumed by Graham Hancock, I think, about the abilities of these civilizations. They had an internal, like, technology where that they were able to like affect their body in such a way,
right?
And their consciousness had been tuned in such a way that their physical bodies was more of a necessity for the consciousness, but that they focus more on the consciousness aspect of themselves,
right?
Or that they came from like quote unquote in here, like the vegetable body, and where the consciousness was less individualistic, and because they didn't have free thought, they were a part of this whole system. They were, the vegetable body was, at least, like it was, just like trees and plants are today. Like they're all part of a network that uses the earth's resources to survive, but no, I just think that it's interesting, like the separation, or like the amount of congruency around the world with these different tellings of ancient times.
Yeah.
And
I just don't know how far-fetched it is. I mean, it strikes me like on the surface easy to call all far-fetched, but like I said, we see people do incredible things, and we do have, like, we know people can slow their rate of breathing. We know people can, like, affect their body with their mind. So, like, what are the limits of that? We definitely don't know what the limits of that are. That's not something our science has fully proved out.
No.
I mean, we talked about this, I think, on one of the first episodes, which was like the idea of like records being broken and stuff.
Yeah,
like
I was just going there.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my head, I was just going there.
Yeah, where
like once the record is set, people now
have something to attain to, and
I think we talked about that in the consciousness episode.
Right. Like people thought no one would ever beat a 4-minute mile, and
then it was done, and then multiple people started breaking that record because they knew it was possible.
Right. And we don't know what the limits to all this are.
Right. Like the focused mind in like specific focus has been documented, but like the larger focus of the brain's abilities has not been studied. Like you can pinpoint like people are doing this to focus their minds on a specific task, or this is happening when they do that and they're in their little flow, or
or like so I've been reading this book about reincarnation in prep for our next episode, and what if, I mean, there are already cultures today that believe in it, and there are religious, beliefs already surrounding reincarnation. But, I mean, if reincarnation is a fact, if we do have like sort of a spirit body, if we have something that like goes on after death and then you die and you're reborn, Like imagine a culture that has that down to a science,
Right.
and like you can identify
know.
who you used to be, and like essentially
Take on that
like
information again. Or whatever.
right, like reassimilate your last life into your current one, so that you are essentially growing wiser with each life you live
consciously.
Like what are the
like in some kind of etheric like external world,
like for instance,
imagine
imagine in your past life you were a scientist of some sort and you were studying whatever, and then you die, you get reborn. If you could somehow identify that as your past life, reincorporate all that knowledge, and then keep building from there, because now you're essentially reconnected to that.
Yeah.
Like how far could we get? And maybe that's the type of when they say someone lived for 500 years, maybe it's a chain of, reincarnations kept together or something. Could be metaphorical in that sort of way too.
I was what that immediately brought to mind was the show we went to last night. Me and Dean, our sister got us tickets to Shane Moss, who's a psychedelic comedian, and his new tour is a visualization comedic tour where he's got a giant screen behind him and he's got somebody on
is essentially live
streaming and DJing the
that
video
screen.
for him,
like VJing.
It's actually sick. Like
it's super
it was
sick.
Cool.
He's incorporating like AI generated stuff. They have a bunch of artist networks that they worked with. That they have like
access
super
to all the
cool
different
psychedelic art and art of all
and
different sorts.
And he utilizes AI, and he's been doing that for the last 10 years. He said they were saying he's an early adopter of the AI image generators.
Right.
And
so he's able to like pull up stuff on the fly
and create things. Even.
So there was times where he was like making fun of Shane. Like Shane would make a couple points, and like the video is clearly making fun of him behind it. It's super funny.
Yeah. Yeah, it added a cool element because Shane's also really funny, and a lot of his stories and a lot of shit he talks about. It was all psychedelic related stuff. Like,
he was telling stories of all the
stuff.
different types of trips and stuff.
Yeah, that was a fun time.
So you were saying this
it made me think of his idea of what psychedelics play in consciousness, or the things you could derive from your psychedelic trip to help you understand consciousness in a sense.
Right.
Is he was saying like consciousness is based upon the idea, like your specific world that you're consciously experiencing is based on everything that you've been taught and told your entire life. And like the psychedelics kind of rip you from that whole thing. So like, and his analogy was, imagine a psychedelic being, the one that you might meet on a trip somewhere or whatever. Imagine that being when it takes psychedelics or when it does something like that where it alters its consciousness, it's being portaled to our world, and just how amazing and nuanced and crazy that experience would be for that being the thing you're tripping on and seeing. Imagine it seeing you and watching your daily life and seeing what you're doing as part of its trip. And like that, I mean, obviously that's a funny way to visualize it and stuff, but it makes me think of like the idea that like based on your circumstances, the way, the people you were born to and the circumstances you were born in and the country you're born in and all of the schooling that you've had to go on to, and then now you're an adult and you're basically making choices based on all of that, and your reality is set up upon that. Like there's some evidence that not all of us are experiencing the world the same way,
right? Based
on the mental health and like people with schizophrenia or whatever it might be, and they're experiencing the world a completely different way. So it's
also people with different views about how the world they also experience the world differently.
Yeah. Everybody who has a different point of view from somebody else is going to experience the world a little different from everybody else.
Yeah. It's like the old thing about like you can't control what happens to you. All you can control is like how you see it, how you react to it, you know? Like you can control what your vision, what your response is to the world around you. But you don't control the world around you directly. But in a way, maybe you do.
Maybe the way you see it is controlled by, right? So like there are some people who just see certain types of people or certain situations as being a negative one, right, even if somebody else might see it as a positive one.
Right.
You know, there's evidence of that, you know, and that's a simpler way to see it. But if they're both looking at the same situation from different points of view and they're completely seeing a different situation, that's evidence that they're not seeing the situation the same. And if that basic fact is true, then how do we know that that what you're actually like visualizing and seeing is not also skewed by that?
Right.
I don't know. It's interesting. But yeah, I think that's a good place to end because we kind of drifted off. But we only got through one chapter.
Sounds about right for us.
This book is probably going to be the first and last episode of this podcast.
Dude.
It won't be the first. It'll be like, what, our third?
Yeah, it's on track.
But I think we'll take a break from this and we'll do a couple like other books and other topics and then revisit it again. But
okay,
this is such a good book, and I think it'll be a kind of our long time.
It's interesting how it connected to our last episode and our next one. I brought up reincarnation for me.
This book is kind of perfect, kind of like interludes with a lot of the different topics that we talk about, and it kind of paints a different picture. So even if we're talking about it in one aspect, like you can kind of reference this book in some way.
Yeah.
Or pull from it. Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, you can follow us on YouTube or on Facebook and Instagram.
Yep.
And you can like, comment, subscribe to our YouTube and Rumble. You got podcasts or on any
send
platform.
Us a message, send us a comment, send us an email, host@dualitycheck.net. We want to have a conversation.
Go check out our website too. Dean has made it twice now. We're gonna maybe make it a third time here soon. I think
it's looking pretty good these days. There's more I can do to it, and I got plans for it in the future. But
come check it out and give us some feedback.
I put a decent amount of work into every episode. So if you click on an episode,
you do.
Go to the website, click the episode you're listening to, look at my show notes there in case your podcast doesn't have the show notes.
Right.
That'll be the best way to see the type of stuff we're talking about as we're talking about it. But YouTube is another good place where it'll all be there.
Yeah. Some good visualizations. You can full screen it.
Yeah. Alrighty, y'all.
All right, y'all.
We will be back with you next time to discuss reincarnation.
Drew 2.0.
Adios.